Good morning, everybody. My name is Joanne Butcher. I am a business coach for filmmakers, and I really specialize in working with filmmakers around everything to do with business and money and raising money and all of those good things so that they can get their films made. And so on the Filmmaker's Life, we do this every 2 weeks, and we interview a filmmaker and ask them to talk to us about their career because when I first started doing this, which was right when COVID started, and my friends were all stuck at home. I was like, okay, I'm going to interview them. Um, I realized that a lot of times filmmakers think that there is some kind of magic path that they're supposed to follow to becoming a filmmaker. And I think in now a couple of years of interviews, we've realized there's no one single path. Everybody does it in their own kind of mixed up way. And so it's really fun to hear from filmmakers how they did it. So today, Michael is my guest, DiBiasio-Ornelas. And thank you so much, Michael, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us about making a career in film.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And so the first question that I always like to ask is, when did you first have an inkling that you were a filmmaker?
First happening, I would say it was about halfway through the first day of shooting my first short film where it clicked. I started as a narrative fiction writer, and my first published short story, um, I got a lot of feedback on it that was comparing me to screenwriters versus fiction writers, just like tone, style.
Okay.
And, at the same time, I happened to meet an independent filmmaker who was an alum of my college and my fraternity. It was while I was still an undergrad at Columbia. And I'd mentioned that to him, and he said, "Oh, you should make the story into a short film. I'll let you borrow my equipment." And I was like, "That sounds fun." Um, and so I did. I mean, I started talking about it, and some friends were like, "Oh, I'll help you. I'll do this, and I'll help you. I'll do that." And so everyone who said that may have regretted it because I called them and say, "Hey, you want to do this?" But the short of it is, I got grabbed a couple of books. I learned the very basics, and then otherwise leaned on just my ability to project manage.
Right.
And I thought, and the only other thing I'll say that I did do is, having not written a screenplay before, I enrolled in a course within the creative writing program as an undergrad, um, with a professor who basically said, in order for me to let you in my class, there needs to be something specific that you want to write. So I said, I want to write an adaptation of this short film that I want to shoot, which he was very excited about, the wanting to shoot part. So for a semester, I workshopped that which ended up being like an 18-page script, 15-minute film. Um, and like I said, about halfway through the first shoot day, when things started to click a little bit, the magic kind of happened a little bit, where I was just like, I got the bug. That's when I caught the bug.
That's really great. That's such a backwards story compared to most stories, that
Yeah.
you were like, oh, I'm a writer, and then, oh, now I'm going to make a film. Um, I often share this, that when I was a child, I'm talking like a young child, I used to have dreams that at the end said the end. you know? So
Yeah.
I dreamt in films, even as a child. But that's a great story. And what kind of writing were you doing at the time?
So at the time, um, I grew up working class, middle class, public school. So a lot of what I was reading on even a more advanced level, I wouldn't say more advanced level, but by volume, I was doing a lot more reading than a lot of my classmates. Um, and like an example of someone I was reading a lot and emulating would be like, at that point, would be like Nelson DeMille. And then when I got to, Columbia, and I started like studying writing formally, my freshman teacher was like, hey, if you're going to write genre like this, I would recommend you read some of the greats in the genre that like are,
Genre was it?
I'm sorry, crime dramas. Um,
Crime dramas.
so I started, my
That's
gateway
not what
was
you
kind of,
call them in the writing world, right? What would you call them?
right. That's
Crime.
right.
Crime.
Yeah, just crime. Yeah.
Crime
Um,
stories or novels. What were you thinking you would?
Primarily, I gravitated to Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett.
Mm,
And my first short film was my first two films were neo noir crime dramas that were, definitely had artistic bents to them, particularly the second one, but was definitely in that genre, which I eventually gravitated away from as I quote unquote got more serious and went into art house for a while until recently where I'm getting
why do
back
you
into
think?
genre.
Why do you think you work back to what that you moved away from crime? Because that's my genre. Whether I'm
Yeah,
writing
I think partially I and I say this with compassion, but like, going to a more serious school for college with a more literary program. I think even in my early years, like when I was still writing like either genre stuff and even some early stuff that I wrote at that time in comedy, I think people look down on it a little bit, and I think I let that affect me a little bit in the workshop environment.
yeah.
Um, but also I just had to plumb those depths a little bit. So I ended up getting like less into genre and more into like deeply studying like D.H. Lawrence and Joseph Conrad. Conrad being much more cinematic, even for someone who's writing a long time ago. D.H. Lawrence, you could kind of trace a line between him and like a Linklater film, but that's about it.
I
Um,
just completely blanking on the Heart of Darkness.
yeah,
Uh, Interestingly, Heart of Darkness, I
which later became, Apocalypse Now. Yeah,
big fan. Would I would call that a crime drama.
yeah, yeah. And he wrote others um,
Yeah.
of a similar
Yeah.
vein. Yep.
It's interesting this whole kind of split between what you're calling literary and genre, you know, and I think that's always been there. And I remember years ago there was a movie that I completely fell in love with. What's it called? Beer Fest. It's
Oh
this,
yeah,
you know, it is this
yeah, yeah.
ridiculous comedy, and I'm not a big comedy fan, but I fell in love with that film. I started taking groups
I
of
love it.
friends
Yeah, it's hilarious.
to see it. We would all go and see Beer Fest, and then one of my closest friends found out that I had gone to see Beer Fest, and he wouldn't speak to me anymore.
Yeah.
And 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 that was, I think, the time when I finally realized, oh, people thought of me as this person who ran an art cinema, and so therefore I was supposed to like art movies, and I wasn't supposed to like anything else. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that there was this um, very very big split, between the two. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, where I feel about it now is like coming from the background that I did is, um, even kind of going back to your first question, I realized later, um, just how much movies, and particularly more commercial movies, not that there weren't like more artistic movies in there as well, but like a happy thing that I did growing up was spend nights and weekends watching movies with family and friends. And I think that like my programming as a screenwriter was starting then, even if I didn't realize it.
right, right. It is that way. I another story I tell is I was given the complete works of Shakespeare at 11,
Yeah.
and kind of have a 5-act structure in my DNA because of that, because of
Yeah.
starting, so young with that. Um, and I'm very interested in this division between high art and low art.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating, and one of my big I nearly said mentor, but I've never met him. My big influences is Mark Kermode, Kermode, and he's a British film critic, and he has a PhD in horror.
Mm.
And I feel as though I've learned a lot about horror from him. Horror is not my genre, but I've certainly learned how to appreciate horror from him, and also that there are so many different types of horror, and just as there are so many types of movies, and there are horrible, terrible movies, and there are great movies in every genre, you know.
Yeah. Mm.
So, so you said you went away from the crime drama, and now you've come back. Is that right?
Um, Not necessarily. I mean, I got away from genre in general and went into more like, my first two features. The first one was more of a straight drama slash like friendship story, steeped in themes of like mental health, which is maybe like an issue based film as well, even though it's not a documentary. And then my second was a romantic dramedy, and I have also been developing for several years with some near misses to get funding and financing on a broader romantic comedy. Um, so I think that kind of started the transition back into genre, going into romantic comedy. But then a couple of years ago, and even like the short film that I made, where I rebooted myself as a filmmaker after like, um, to be honest, a couple of years of like depression and struggle after the previous recession. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I rebooted myself making a sci-fi drama that I really was really dear to me. Um, and then I think I've kind of just become agnostic. I know some people frown upon it in the industry, but like for me, for better or worse, it's always about the next project. And with the one exception of this larger rom-com that has a bigger budget, I think the advantage for me and for my collaborators has always been, we want to make this particular movie, we're going to go do it. And we're trying to get more intelligent about that in terms of like career sustainability, which is how I met you. Um, but really, I think for better or worse, like I would be happy and probably would want to pivot from comedy to drama to right now I'm working on a horror comedy. I have some sci-fi ideas banked. With like I'm never going to write a musical, but like with rare exception, like kind of probably moving between sci-fi, horror, some broader comedy, maybe some. I have written a thriller. I like mashups as well. I think mashups have a lot to offer if you have a story that you're passionate about. Because even the horror comedy that I'm working on, it's within the horror fantasy genre. It's got some mashup. It's not just a werewolf movie. It's got witches and vampires as well.
That's definitely
Just because it was, yeah.
matchup. So back to there you are on set on your first short film, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. You said the magic happened. I got the bug. Do you know what that was? Do you remember what that was? Because
Well, there's,
you had been a writer. I feel as
yeah,
writing and filmmaking are like,
yeah. In retrospect, there's probably three things that I could say about it. Like more broadly or thematically, I think that um, in terms of the magic, I was just like, I it was one of the first moments where I felt for most of my life I felt very confused about that relationship between my public and private self. So like
mm,
I think it's probably common in a lot of directors and filmmakers in particular, but growing up I was I did well in school. I played team sports. I was in student government. I had all of these like I, I had all of these things I did with my public persona. But then I had this very separate private writing life that I did share with people, but like, you know, in the safety of a English class or
wow,
a
yeah.
creative writing course as I got older in high school. And then even when one of the reasons I think I got into Columbia, like on my acceptance letter was my essay, which was about embracing my identity at the convergence of those things, but really as a writer. And I think but I think what happened later, starting on that day, was filmmaking allows me to combine those two sides of myself that I couldn't feel comfortable with, one or the other, but at the same time kind of help me start to integrate as a person. So like I could, as a screenwriter, I could be privately explore something very intimate and important to me, which is the story and the script. But then as a producer and a director, I have to go out in the world as a public facing person who can collaborate, and who can learn in groups, which is a process for for someone like me. Um,
That's so
and
interesting. Do you think that when you were saying about you didn't use the word conflict, but this sort of public private, do you think that in a way becoming the director producer was a way to embrace a different part of yourself, a public part of yourself?
I think of it more in terms of reconciling that part of myself with the private self in like a way that felt like safe and structured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
so like the way that I look at it is, um, you know, I got back into writing fiction. I published my first book last year. I still am probably going to do that.
I didn't hear
Um,
from you, Michael. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
What's the book?
It's called Cessation.
Station. Okay. Is
Yeah,
that
it's
a
on.
novel?
Yeah, it's a novel. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kindle, places like that.
Oh, we got to promote that. That's
Yeah, that is straight literary. You know, it's a modern retelling of Bartleby the Scrivener from like the point of view of,
wow.
you know, post-recession America for millennials.
Wow.
Um, but but with the filmmaking, I realized later, um, that it is for me that perfect marriage of these two parts of me that alone weren't completing me on the day to day. So that, like, you know, to be clear, like at the end of the day, this isn't necessarily, it's literally impossible even for the busiest, most successful filmmakers. But like, I am happiest outside of like my family life when I'm on set, in the midst of like, you know, racing against time and money to complete some version of the vision that I had when I was, you know, writing the script.
That's great. And we've wandered along, but you started out saying that in that moment when that magic happened, you said they were about
There was a little funny anecdote. Yeah. So I was, I, it was also the first day. It was around the same time. It wasn't the exact same moment, but there was a point where, you know, and I didn't know that much of what I was doing. I knew vaguely what I was doing based on like research instinct and like, you know, seeing incomplete examples of how to direct a film on TV. Um, but there was one point where, you know, we were finally moving a little bit, but we were running behind, as you do, especially on the first day of your first film, and things were getting a little hectic. And like, the AD's asking for something, the DP's asking for something. Like, you know, everyone's like, you know, asking me questions, and we finally get things settled down. We're getting ready to start rolling after a bit of a delay, and someone, um, I'm on the other side of a prop wall, and someone, as we are, getting ready to roll, like keeps talking, and I like shout, not angrily, but in a stern way, you know, quiet on the set, like we're rolling cameras, and then it gets really quiet because a few people were like, oh, like he just got a little like stern, and then I hear my grandmother, who was an extra in the scene, say, "Sorry, Michael." and which was cute. And I apologized to my grandmother later. I didn't yell, but like, I was just like, okay, well, if I'm taking this so seriously that I'm like making my grandmother feel bad, um, for talking before we roll, um, you know, this might be something that I care about.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it. That reminds me of the movie Krisha. Um, Edward Trey Schultz. I think that's the first time I've ever actually got all parts of his name. The Edward Trey Schultz first film, Creature, that he made for $30,000, and everybody except two professional actors were members of his family.
Yeah.
And his grandmother was in a wheelchair, and she was on set as well and part of it.
Yeah.
It's great. So that's wonderful. You had your grandmother on set.
Oh yeah, I had my dad, my grandmother, my uncles were in that one. I mean, the main actors were, well, one was a friend actually, and had some experience, but the other, and the other was a guy I knew that had some experience, but they were more like actors on set. But then extras, I just filled with family and friends. That's all I could do.
Right.
Do it for free.
How did you go from that first short to making a feature? Did you make other shorts in between?
Yeah. So the next thing that I did was um, I kind of, before crowdfunding had even been invented, I kind of started crowdfunding a couple of years before, I think, or maybe just as it was being invented, but I wasn't aware of it. I had an idea for another project, made a really dumb mistake, and it was just like, I'm going to quit my job and go direct this project, which was a featurette. So it was a 45-page script, and I quit my job thinking it would make enough money for me to start my career. But I was 20 something. But I did that. I moved back home for a few months. I had met my wife, my eventual wife by then. We'd gotten engaged. She's an actor, and agreed to help produce the movie. So basically together, instead of getting married, we made a 45-minute, terrible running time. We made a 45-minute featurette, and it was a big growth experience. Like it's the only film that I don't have publicly like available. I kind of keep it locked up.
Can
But
you explain to everybody here what you mean by a terrible running time? Because that is
yeah, I
so...
mean, I actually think it's less of an issue now in certain terms, but basically like film festivals, when I was getting started, film festivals were like, the either officially or
it's the same today.
yeah, well, no, they were saying like 15 minutes max, and now I feel like they're saying more like 10 minutes max, ideally. So like partially it's like at that point in your career, usually it's different, a little different now because you can just dump stuff online, but there are drawbacks to that. But 15 minutes was kind of your cap for a short film to have the marketplace know what to do with it. And then or like at worst 65, I would probably say more like 70 minutes for a short feature, and we were just square in the middle of that. And so we had a distributor at that time with that little experience expressed interest in the movie and watched the movie, and what with us, like he was like, yeah, bring it to my office, we'll watch it. And like we sat in the room and watched, Rebecca, my wife, and I watched the movie with this distributor who she had met in a hallway. And we looked him up, and he had creds, and he's like, that was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's good, like you're a good writer, but it's 45 minutes and no one's going to know what to do with this.
Right. It's so funny because I think a lot of times filmmakers will end up making a 45-minute film and it doesn't do anything, and then they end up feeling demoralized because they don't understand.
I did. That's what happened. I went into a depression. I had also quit my job, and a major economic recession had started,
right.
And I had nowhere to live. So and that became like a long crawl back. So like I had to take care of.
You still got married. That worked out.
We got married a couple of years later. Yeah. I think Rebecca's on, actually. She can
hi,
attest, but there were probably a couple of points where she had to be like, if something doesn't change here, we're not, you got to make a choice. And then just kind of speed along a bit.
But that 45-minute thing is so, and I've heard even longer times that people make a film, and as I said, what will happen is a filmmaker will translate that to mean, oh, people don't like my work, instead of the runtime is no good.
Yeah, and you know, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a business plan, I had a strategy. We were gonna like split it up into pieces and episodes on the internet. It was a crazy idea. But we had screening, like we had a couple of sold out screenings, including in New York City, of that film, and we put a short out in front of it, so we had an hour of programming,
Right.
and people enjoyed it, and people paid for the DVD after. I mean, it's your audience, it's like friends and family, but like people enjoyed the film. It's just, you know, it was never gonna be viable financially, and it just set me back a couple of years. And it was a big growth experience too, and it was important when I wouldn't take it back. But from there, it took me a couple of years until, you know, I took care of my mental health. I got a part-time job that led to a bigger part-time job that led to a full-time job, to kind of get myself back on track. I will say the experience of the first two features like helped me get work. So I worked in corporate video for a consulting firm for many years, and like those two productions like got me that work. Um, and that allowed me to kind of rebuild and build up enough stability to the point where, when I finally produced that short that I mentioned, that sci-fi short, it's called Multiverse. It was kind of like, even like the investor was invested in a couple of my films today. Like he was at a screening of that, and said to me, "When you made that movie, I saw a big jump into your like abilities as a filmmaker, which made me feel like you're gonna make it someday, and I want to be like on that journey." So like I don't think that happens without the big failure, without the depression, without, you know, the recession rebuilding my life. It was as painful as it was at the time. And Rebecca was there with me, and we went through it together. But and like we took those lessons into making the short. That short, not really a festival hit. We got into some things, but like qualitatively, delivering it to our growing audience. Basically, what we did is I had already written my first feature by the time we were finishing the short, because it was a low budget sci-fi short, which meant it took 4 years to finish, because it took 2 years to get someone to do the visual effects for free. And it was crowdfunded for a minimum amount before that. And so what we did is, I had the idea for what ended up being my first feature, bootstrap, guerrilla style. What can we get away with shooting that is going to be a good movie based on what resources we have and what money we can raise through crowdfunding. And so what we did is we organized a screening of the short that was mental health themed. The feature was mental health themed. A family friend who had the means to do so agreed to sponsor a screening of the short, where we also launched the crowdfunding campaign for the feature like in the room, and started raising money for the feature in the room. So that my first feature was the Videoblogs, and we basically wrote down on paper what we thought we could raise based on our audience at the time. I think that was like $15,000. And when I looked at the barest bones version of the script, it wasn't quite enough. But in consultations with with Seed and Spark, the company we worked with, who were in their early days and were very supportive of the campaign, they hadn't had too many features on there yet. I worked with them, and they basically said, "Look, what's the least? What do you need? If 12 is not going to be enough, what do you need?" And I was like, "At least 20." And they said, "So try to raise 20. Like you can do it. Just stretch towards it, and we'll help you as best we can." And so we made that decision, and it was tough. But we ended up raising 22 or 23,000 with that campaign, which was enough to shoot the movie. And then at some point, you know, I wrote, directed, produced, and shot that. A big part of the ability to make that movie was me physically shooting it. I had never DP'd anything on my own before. I really only did it because it was the only way the movie was going to get made, because I had enough reps behind the camera by then with my corporate video job to feel like I could, with a lot of research and by like, I kind of just like called a couple of DPs that I would have hired but couldn't pay and said, "Can you just teach me what to do?" And
What did
like,
you do?
yeah, and you know, so like to like the guy who DP'd my that short Multiverse, I would have loved to hire him. I couldn't afford him. I wouldn't even ask him, but I hired him for a corporate job where I gave him a couple $1,000s to shoot a corporate job We had a
Oh,
long ride to
nice.
get to the set, and during the ride to the set, I just grilled him on how he would shoot the feature.
That's great.
Um,
What I just want to go back also when you said you showed the short and you raised money in the room. Do you remember how much money you raised in the room when you did that?
oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, we already by then, like Seed and Spark was kind of like had that research of saying like try to get your first 20% of funds in like your first week and try to like pre-seed um, that with like your likeliest contributors. So that was our, you know, we hit that pretty hard, and we started by hitting that in the room. I want to say we raised maybe like 1,500 to 2,000 that first night.
Mm-hmm, hmm. Yeah, that I love. I haven't heard anybody doing that particular thing, and I just very into raising money. So I thought that was a great idea, and a way to start getting the word out about the film, and raise that initial bit of money, um, and
And then we did the same thing virtually online, where we had been marketing the film. You can
yes,
only see it in New York City when we premiere, and then people elsewhere can see it online. And oh, by the way, here's the link to our crowdfunding campaign for a thematically like similar feature.
yes, that's fantastic. So, what I love about the way that you made the original short and then the way that you made this is that you really just jumped in and did something. Even though the first one you had to take some classes to be able to do it, and then this one you just jumped in even with the fundraising. Because I feel as
Yeah,
though where a lot of filmmakers won't go there, they won't do the fundraising, but unless you have enough money, you can't make a professional film.
yeah, and like the other thing that I did is like and it was tough, but like I would spend most of my lunch breaks in my corporate job. I would get my lunch from home or go out and grab lunch, and I'd sit back at my desk and I would um, like just research. So like for instance, like part of the reason I was confident shooting to save money shooting DPing my own first feature was because I had spent hours and hours on forums at the time were popular for independent filmmakers,
Oh, right.
and just researching cameras, picking a camera that I felt like I could afford that had a good reputation. That changes every couple of years as manufacturers kind of, you know, figure
Yeah,
things out.
credit
The
you
time at the
one by one.
Yeah, like when I started, Canon had the hot indie cameras, and then Panasonic, and then when I was like really getting going, it was still Panasonic. And so like I picked a camera, and I studied how to do everything possible with this cheap DSLR camera to achieve a more cinematic quality.
Mm.
And I experimented shooting some little like throwaway sketches and stuff with people on weekends, or eventually like working with an actual comedic sketch group in collaboration. They had a thing where like we want to do a funny video every week, but we want the quality to be better. So eventually I helped them, they helped me. Rebecca was really involved in that as well. We would switch like shooting, writing, acting. I didn't do any acting because that's not in my skill set. Um,
Rebecca was in the film, right? Rebecca was there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'll say like, especially because she's here, I'll say that she deserves so much credit for so much of this as well, because it's like, you know, whereas for me, like it's a great advantage for me that I can write and also direct. I'm sometimes envious of like the few people who have the skill sets like Rebecca, where like, if she wanted to, she could direct it as well and has, but like, um, who can write, direct, and act. Like I can't do that, but because of my relationship with her, like
Hmm.
I can write. I could write that first feature knowing I have my lead actor. I'm
Right.
close with her. I know everything she can do. Maybe even some of the things that like she doesn't know that she can do.
Right.
And we can push each other and support each other. She was heavily involved as a producer on those first two projects together, even to the point where like she had to scale back over time because she couldn't um,
Both
produce
things.
and focus on acting at the same
Yeah.
time, which I think is tremendous pressure.
Yeah.
But that's a huge advantage, because it's like, okay, between the two of us, we can cover the script, the direction, the shooting, and the lead actor we can write the story, craft the story around,
Yes.
and that you save a lot of money, or you gain a lot of leverageable soft money by doing that.
Right. That's great. Some great strategies there. You're dropping a lot of pearls of wisdom today for filmmakers. It's really good. Um, so, when you went to make your next film, was that when you were able to bring on investors for your film, for the next
So
film?
yeah, so with the video blogs, while it unfortunately didn't come close to making its money back, it did do well as a calling card feature.
Mm-hmm.
So it, the process of getting it out, and I'll say with that, we also worked really hard on marketing and distribution. I have a marketing background. Um, Rebecca has a background in events and is just very good at logistics. And so from the start with our first feature, we also planned on how to distribute it ourselves if or when we didn't get picked up by a traditional distributor. And so part of that was we organized a 10-city screening tour that was supposed to be, and still did, but we had some issues with the distributor, kind of seeding a big launch on VOD. The idea was like screen for 4 to 6 weeks in 10 cities, build momentum, launch on VOD so that it's like, on your IMDb chart, it's like going like this, and then you launch on VOD and hopefully it goes like that. We went like this, but it was, if I had known, I would have spent like $1,000 on Facebook ads and that film might have made a return on its money, but I didn't know.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
But what happened is, I met some more experienced producers who watched the video blogs and were impressed with it. For a while, for about a year, I also ran a podcast where I would interview more experienced people in the industry, more broadly creatively, but I focused a lot on filmmakers and producers. And just randomly, I came up with an idea for something, wrote a first draft of something. This ended up being the rom-com that I've been developing for 6 years now. But the short of it is that, I worked for a year or two developing this movie. It's a rom-com two-hander. One of the producers that I met through the video blogs had a relationship with some A-list talent that based on a movie that he had directed, and we basically like rewrote and packaged the movie for this A-lister, got it to him, and very quickly, not very quickly, but fairly quickly, his agent liked it and wanted to pass it to this A-list actor. And all of a sudden it looked like this like movie that I had like thrown together was going to get $1 million or $2 million budget, and my career was going to, be on its way.
Exactly what you wanted it to do on IMDb.
Yeah, and then as is common, I would learn later, like his agent liked it, his manager felt like it was too similar to another project that he had already done. So we get back to the drawing board, and then honestly, we spent another like year or two.
Wow.
We raised on the strength of the script and on the video blogs, we raised $100,000 to make that movie. But when it got bigger, that $100,000 was very far from the $1 million that we needed to shoot. Yeah. So it became a matter of chasing talent attachments, because I, as a director, had nowhere near enough of a name for investors or agents, sales agents, anyone to really care. And at the end of 2 years, we even hired a casting director out in LA. We sent offers. Like, I was spending all sorts of time. We burned through $25,000 of development money. I was spending hours and hours working for free, like watching people's movies, writing like letters to like that probably never even went to these people. And finally, I said, I went back to the investors and I said, hey, I have an idea for another movie that's thematically similar to this one. I think instead of burning more time and money, we should make this smaller, thematically similar movie now, and then go back to the drawing board on the bigger one, which is what we did. So that ended up becoming the Sleepless. We raised a little bit more money.
Great.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so that, we didn't have to crowdfund. It was equity backed, a couple of private investors. And I did go through the whole process of like seeing if I could raise more money. It just didn't happen. yeah, when we made that movie
Would
that
you
came out.
would you call your experience trying to make the rom-com development hell? Is that an appropriate term for that?
Um, yeah, I think the indie flavor of that. Yeah, I mean, you learn as you go through it, like how common it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's also like, I'm very much of the mindset that like, you know, your lucky break should find you prepared, and like that just wasn't the time for it to happen. And in a way, like, I'll say that when I when I was making the indie, like the micro budget version of that movie that I thought was going to be like the $100,000 version that it ended up becoming anyway, that Sleepless ended up becoming anyway. Um, when I was just bringing it to this producer thinking it would be a micro budget, and then he was like, "No, actually, this is a good story. We should like beef it up and get it to this A-lister that I know." Um, I don't think I was ready for that. That's actually when it became a real possibility that I was going to get $1 million or $2 million as a filmmaker to make a movie. I again lost it a little bit with my mental health. I stopped sleeping. I
Oh,
developed severe
right.
chronic insomnia,
Yeah.
not just because of that. There were other things going on in my life, but it was the precipitating event. But again, in a weird way, it led me to an important place where a couple of years later, I had lived as a severe chronic insomniac, and I wrote a movie inspired by that experience. And
That experience.
yeah, so um, so yeah, I mean, it I think it all was the way that it was supposed to work out. Um, it ended up being kind of a weird thing where I'm like, okay, I'm making another calling card micro budget feature, um, but like when we made the video blogs, there was a Sundance producer at a screening in New York, and he came up to me afterwards and he was saying, if I didn't know how much you shot that for, which was like a hard budget of like 60 grand, I would have thought you spent $1 million. And then when our primary investor for the Sleepless saw it, he's just like, if I didn't know how much you spent on this because I gave you the money, I would have thought that you spent $1 million, over $1 million, like making this movie. Um, I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but
Awesome.
it felt important to mention.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but the point is that like, um, you know, I just felt like I had to find a way to keep going. And that's kind of where I'm at now
Yeah.
too, as well, where like, the hard cash cost of the video blogs was 60,000. The hard cash cost of the Sleepless was at the end of the day around 120. So that's doubling. And now I'm in the middle of making a probably $300,000 movie, which is kind of roughly doubling it again. Um,
So,
so that's a good,
in
you
fact,
know,
because I want to, in a few minutes, open it up to questions, but what is this film? So tell everybody about this film and what your thinking is around the current project.
yeah.
And
So
I
I,
love the
I,
fact that you're talking about numbers and money. It's so refreshing.
yeah. Well, as I alluded to, like I'm coming back to genre. To be honest, like when, so a lot of drama in the life of a filmmaker. I got fired from my job
Oh,
um, the around Christmas time. So
right.
I got fired from my job in December, and I had previously left the job I was at for a really long time, uh, nominally to make a move as a filmmaker. I left New York City. I moved to Vermont, simplify my life, be happier. This was during COVID, but I ended up in another job. They offered me a lot of money. I took it because it was the first time that had ever happened to me. Um,
Yeah.
and I did it for 6 months, but they let me go. Reasons don't matter. But my first instinct after that was like, look, like if you're really serious now, you've got a toddler, you're in a new place, you've cut costs a bit, though not that much after you have a kid, by moving out of New York City. Um, my
Mm.
first instinct wasn't I have to get another job. My first instinct was like you need to hit the phones and call your network and find a way to get this career sustainability going if it's ever going to happen. And so on one of those calls, I was talking to a friend of mine who, so when I left, I grew up in Rhode Island. When I left, I became like a New York City filmmaker. I got into art house films, blah, blah, blah. A friend of mine who I went to high school with, stayed and became like the guy as a local filmmaker in Rhode Island, has been very successful, just continuing to make movies. He started in horror, he moved into crime and thriller. He's done some dramas, some comedies, some family movies. He works really hard. He's a nice guy. He gets stuff done. And like, that was one of my first calls. And I was like, look, man, this is what I'm trying to do. You've done such a good job of it. Like, do you have any advice? Do you have any work? Like, I had gotten much more humble by that time. Um, and he mentioned during that conversation, he's like, I got a guy who can fund low budget horror. If you give me something like decent and I like the script, I'll pass it along. And I was like, well, I have this idea that just came out of like a one-liner joke that I didn't even remember that I read, which was like, I posted on Facebook one day, apparently 7 years ago, and then forgot, like, what if someone was bitten by a werewolf, but it was a Yorkie, but they turned into a Yorkie. So like Yorkie being a small dog, like, just felt funny. Like, there's a werewolf, but it said it's a Yorkie size. So I mentioned this to him, and I was like, I did it. I know what happened after that. I was driving with Rebecca, and I was like, hey, I have an idea for a movie, and I think it's probably the most marketable idea I've ever had. I'm going to mention it to you, and I just want to see how you react. And she was like, fine. And I said, the Yorkie werewolf. And she laughed. And she's like, okay, maybe, and, Rebecca will tell me, if it's doesn't sound viable. Like, I was hoping that she would, but she's like, I didn't know for sure. And so fast forward, I after that call with him, I was like, all right, I don't know what this is about, but I'm confident in my abilities as a storyteller. It's got to be ridiculous. I'm looking outside the window, and the world is more absurd than I've ever seen in my lifetime. So I just kind of went for it. I knew roughly how much I might have to spend to make the movie, and I tried to keep that in the back of my head, and maybe didn't completely succeed, but we're working on that when writing the story. And so so it ended up becoming like a horror comedy, absurdist horror comedy called The Yorkie Werewolf, and it's about a rebellious teen witch who gets turned into a Yorkie-sized werewolf, and she gets thrown into a decades-old war between creatures of the night and the local mafia. And it's ridiculous, and I had a lot of fun writing it, and I'm having a lot of fun developing it. And I had that same process. I wrote the script. I started talking to my friend again about like his connections to get it funded. Still pursuing that. That actually hasn't manifested. But I went back to one of my investors from my last two films, who, to be clear, has not made his money back.
Right.
And I was like, look, like, I'm at the point where if I don't make a movie that makes its money back, like, I don't know if I'm going to survive as a filmmaker. So like, when I pitch this to you, like, know that like, this is my best shot at doing that. But as soon as he heard the title, he was like, yeah, I'm in, and, we talked about it a bit, and like, we did have a conversation where he asked questions of like, he's like, look, like I know the industry is in a tough spot. He has invested in other films, other than mine.
Oh, interesting.
And he's made his money back on many, but not all. And he's just like, so he has done a little bit of his homework.
Interesting. Yeah.
And he said, like, he's like, how do you do it? And I ran him through it. I was like, look, I think like, you keep the budget low, you make something that is this marketable. And like, the way I envision it is like, I can see the poster, I can see how silly it looks. I can see people seeing the title and the poster and being interested enough to watch the trailer. If I believe that there are the right trailer moments in the movie, people watch the trailer, they give it a shot, and before they know it, they're laughing and enjoying themselves. They watch the movie. From there, it's really about like a windowed release strategy and leaning on the right distributor who knows what they're doing or knows enough of what they're doing that we can work together on marketing and distribution. And then just, taking another crack at it, just getting another at bat. Because if it's like, 3 features and this one makes its money back, that's a good batting average that will, hopefully get me to the point where I can start pitching other and developing other movies and continue working on that rom-com and building up my cred and stuff like that.
Well, what I want to add here for everybody, just so you know, because you're not going to get to see this movie next week, is all I can say. But um, this teenage witch is one of the favorite characters that I've ever come across. She is fabulous, and her mom. Oh no, grandmother, right?
Both, yeah, they're both in there. Yeah.
Anyway, they are fabulous. And so I've said this. Chris, one of my clients, is on today, and I said he has a film out called Bad Detectives about these two women, and I said, Chris, I don't care what these women are doing. They're so fantastic. I just want to hang out with them. So your teenage witch and her mom and her grandma are those characters. I don't care what they're doing. I just want to hang out with them because and they have so much going for them, you know.
Yeah. So we're going for it.
We're going for it. So, does anybody have any questions for Michael? Let me put it so I can see all your hands raised. Ed, go ahead.
Hey, Michael, that was absolutely terrific. I enjoyed your presentation. I have one question for you. What's your outlook on music for your films?
Outlook. So I'll be honest, like it's not a strong suit for me. So like um, we had some diegetic music in my first feature. Other than that, we didn't do very much at all. Um, and partially that was a budget thing, but I'll say with the Sleepless, being in New York City for nearly 20 years and being an artist, like I had a lot of, and being a fan of music, like that's the extent of my knowledge about music. I developed relationships with a bunch of independent musicians whose work I really admired. And so like, as I was writing the script, as we were developing the project, I was kind of keeping a cue in my head of which of my friends' songs we might include. And, we had a music supervisor and he approached them and, we did eventually, I also eventually, like I felt like there was a really appropriate moment in the Sleepless for a closing credit song that I wanted to be original. And I approached an independent singer-songwriter who I'm a big fan of and commissioned for like a decent size of money for our budget, like not a ton, but like I said, if I give you this amount, can you give me a closing credits song for the movie? And he gave me a scratch track and it was just so amazing. I'm so in love with the song, even as its own thing. And then our EP on the Sleepless is also a composer. And so early on, like he was probably going to handle that. And we didn't have a big budget and we didn't have a lot of time because he's busy on other projects, but he did what he could and we were really happy with that. So I kind of try to trust other people with that. And then on Yorkie Werewolf, I'm thinking probably, look, in an ideal world, I know exactly what I would want to do for the music other than hiring a composer to like just do a good horror score. I don't know if we're going to be able to afford that, but yeah, I kind of let the creative lead
Yes,
and then
you are.
trust collaborators.
Yes, you are going to be able to afford that.
We need to talk, Michael.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll put you two in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Kay, go ahead.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for this. This has just been so insightful, and I love the vulnerability and getting into all the, the details about the barriers and the resistance points and that sort of thing. So, thank you especially for that. When you're doing with any of these films, have you gone the route of raising development money to give you like space to kind of work or to put together a team? I know that's something that doesn't usually happen on micro budget, but if that's been something you've thought about or if you've had any experience with that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is tough with the budgets that I've worked to at this point. Like I'll say, like, I think I mentioned this, but like the feature that I have been developing for a long time, the rom-com, we raised $100,000 towards that budget and we ended up spending 25,000 effectively on development. And that bothered me, given that eventually that the rest of that money was spent on what became the Sleepless, my official second feature. Other than that, it's like, it's all just soft costs of like as much as possible, like my time or favors. So yeah, I mean, like, because even so, like right now we've raised $100,000 for the Yorkie Werewolf, and we're trying to raise a couple more to round out the budget. And like, I, even though like I have today maybe I have less money in my bank account than when we shot the Sleepless, and where I did pay myself like my freelance like I do freelance marketing to pay the bills, and like if I spent 10 hours on development in pre-production, I would try to pay myself 10 hours at my marketing rate, or like my lowest marketing rate or something. So it's a balance, but like right now, because I know it's going to be such a challenge to juice that budget with like my aspirations for this movie, I'm not spending as much on development, even to the point of where like I'm grappling with whether or not to outsource some more professional graphic design this early in the process, which I would normally do as a marketer, but I just don't know if it dollar for dollar it makes sense yet, where I can just kind of wait, because this movie is one that I think if like the first time you see it, you can watch it, that might be more powerful marketing than, you know, any long tail thing that I would do.
Thank you. Very, very, very helpful.
Hey, that is not the question I thought you were going to ask.
What was the question you thought I was going to ask?
I thought you were going to ask, how do you put a 10-city film tour together?
Oh, yeah. Well, that, you know, I'd actually thought about that initially, and then I got excited about something else. So
Something else later. Well, I'll put you two in touch. So.
All right.
Great.
Sleep on a lot of couches.
Prince, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Awesome. I really appreciate you sharing your story, first off.
Oh, Prince, you just muted yourself. Prince. By the way, Michael.
Oh, can you speak me?
Yeah, you. Oh, now you just came back. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to say thank you, but I wanted something you said really struck me in that you said there was a point where you thought you were going to get the $1 million+ budget that was going to catapult your career to the next level. And I was wondering, obviously that seems to still be a goal at this point in time. And what do you think is going to take for you to get to that next level, to where you feel that where you get that $1 million+ budget to catapult your career to that next level?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, right now I feel like it's one of probably three ways. The first is, you know, the rom-com that I've been developing for years. Like eventually, like I even decided to grow the scale of it more, because, you know, if people are watching the Sleepless and they're saying, oh, they're looking at it as a effectively $1 million movie, I don't want to repeat that same structure. That's going to be boring for me, and it may not even be interesting to either my core audience or the other version of that on a wider scale. So we redeveloped that to be like a $6 million movie, and that means like it's either happening or it's not, based on talent attachments or relationships. And you know, my producer has made 10 million, $6 million movies and has relationships, but like, you know, it's just that's a movie made in the system, for better or worse. So the only way that's going to get made is if, you know, through luck and preparedness, because the script is where it's at and people like it, and or like through an attachment, an A-list attachment that's going to substantiate the budget. There is a version of that movie that can be made for 2 million. If some actor wants to come on board and like we can get 2 million, I can do that. So that's one possibility. You know, I spent most of the last year working really hard on that movie, and I started to feel again like it was just too elusive and too outside my control. So I think the next likeliest scenario is like make this micro budget horror, knock it out of the park, get a healthy return for investors. You know, I'll be honest with you, it's a bold move for a micro budget horror, but like I left it open for a sequel, you know, maybe even like a couple, because like it's just gonna probably be a fun experience for me and a fun experience for people who watch it. I still don't even know if it would be at that level, but I think either that or a mixture of like the third option, which is like some script that either is in my archive that I'm gonna pull back out. For instance, like I have a horror movie that I was writing for a while that it's just not where it needs to be in my head yet, so I put it away. But if I have a successful horror comedy and someone's like, what else do you have? And I mentioned that movie, I could pull that out, or between now and then, one of my other ideas could manifest. So like, those are the paths that I can see. And I think probably the likeliest scenario is going to be option 4, that I have no idea what it is. And you know, the only other thing that I'll say, and I still don't know the answer, to be honest, of whether this is me being insecure or me being reasonable. I think another path for me could be taking on official paid work as a screenwriter on a larger scale for a couple of reps before I get to the point where I have enough cred in Hollywood, and with my previous 3 features behind me, where I can do it that way. And I'll say, like, you know, after the Sleepless, like I did end up a finalist on a WGA project, where I would have, you know, been a WGA member if I had gotten that job, and it was an adaptation. And I went all in on that until, you know, it got to the point where like I started having questions about how viable the film was, and I, you know, kind of told them to take it or leave it in terms of hiring me, and they left it. But you know, that, to my knowledge, that movie is still in development, and I'm, you know, I have a that has some funding. So I think that's a big lesson that I would probably like try to encourage anyone to kind of absorb from like anything that you've learned from me, which is like, it's getting harder as like I scale up and as I get older and like have a kid and stuff. But like, to me, what's worked is just finding a way to make the next thing, however you have to do it, while growing along the way. And it does take strategic thinking. It does take doggedness. It does take a lot of hard work. I'm waiting for the luck part, but I've had a couple of those lessons too, like in terms of the investors that I've had to this point. So, you know, it is possible, I think.
That was a great question, Prince, and that was an even better answer, Michael, with all those different permutations. And I always like to tell our guests, at the top of the hour, we stop. You can go if you have to, you know, run and talk to investors. That's kind of what I'm imagining you have to do next. But if you would like to take another question, James raised his hand.
Yeah, I can probably do another 5-10 minutes.
All right, let's take another question, and then also I just want to say, anybody, if you want to talk to me about working with me, Prince, you and I have to have another conversation. I've been kind of gone because I had COVID and I've been sick for a whole month. So Prince, you and I need to have another conversation. All right, James, what's your question?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for all the great information. Just one quick question. I wanted to know, so outside of family and friends, where do you usually start with investors? And then how, if it is someone that you don't know, how do you usually approach them? And like, do you provide a pitch deck? Do you provide a, you know, if it's a script Bible, whatever it is? So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, my first answer is gonna be like, at least for me, the first handful of investors have come from family and friends. It's just family and friends with the means. You know, it's like, for me, it was a short list. But you know, maybe it's a longer list than like some people have. But what I will say is, so one of our, for example, actually both of our investors for the Sleepless were crowdfunding backers first. So, you know, so one of them, when they supported our first short film that we crowdfunded, or our first feature, doesn't really matter, but like, you know, you'll see, like, so look, if you do a crowdfunding campaign and someone drops $500 to $1,000, which is, you know, you should have that tier available, and you shouldn't you should aspire to get 1 to 5 people at that tier, depending on your network. Everyone's is different, but like we knew that like there are a few people who might have larger sums of money compared to most of the people we know. So like, let's make sure there's an EP tier when we're crowdfunding for like 1,000, I think was what we did. And so that allows you, so what you do then is like you hopefully get 1 or 2 of those people in at an amount of money that's large for you, but not for them. And the way you learn that is like, look, if depending on how well they know you, but even if they're just like even if they're family or a friend, like if they can drop $1,000 in a crowdfunding campaign, they can probably invest 10 to 25 to maybe even 50 as an investor potentially, right? That doesn't mean they're going to, because then you have to make a good film, deliver it, make them happy, rinse and repeat, and scale up as possible. So I would say that like that would be the first source. And I will, yeah, and I did like I have done a couple of pitch decks for the few features that I have developed, and we did take those out to people that we are friends of friends or friends of family, and it just gets harder the further away you get. I think what worked for me is continuing to build, from one film to the next, to meet people, to like I force myself to get better at networking. Really, like the best thing to do is to like network in parallel. So like with other filmmakers, with other producers, like just grow your footprint, and that will grow the pool. And from there, like you'll find hopefully more of those people who have the means to invest. I think, so far for me, people who I'm more or less cold calling or cold emailing, it just hasn't worked. And I don't think it's going to work a lot of the time. Maybe as you get further on in your career and you're more in like the business and they're more used to it, I still think it's a matter of like, so like for instance, with the Yorkie Werewolf, we have a couple of more people on our list that are warmer leads, including like another investor that we haven't, another previous investor we haven't gone back to yet, and we'll go to soon, but with a pitch deck because she needs that more than the first one did. We'll go down the list in order of heat by who's the likeliest to maybe have the capacity or to be interested in this particular project, ideally both. And then, as you get further down the list, it gets less likely, but still possible. And then after that, it's like, okay, the list is going to get even cooler, where it's just like bare acquaintances or referrals. And to this point for me, I haven't landed any of those yet. And I know it can be done, and I know it's possible and maybe even necessary at this stage. But to this point, I think, especially early on, you're best focusing on what you think you can raise within your network, maybe increasing it by a good 20% so that you're aspiring towards something higher. And then, like I said, just, rinse and repeat. And, hopefully meet collaborators along the way that are going to help with that last leg. So like, I think the longer you last, so if you make one feature, you're in a particular pool. If you make a second feature, you're in a much smaller pool. Like it's a big drop off. If you make a third, which technically I've done because I made an experimental feature on Zoom during the pandemic, but like, if you make a third, I think you're really showing people that you're in it. And I think you're getting to the point where like other people can help you connect to those colder relationships. So it's really just a long way of saying, just like, be strategic, be honest, aspire, and just grind. Hopefully in a balanced way where you don't also sink other parts of your life, which I have done in the past and don't do anymore.
Awesome.
Those were great, Michael. So many pieces in there that I think people don't really realize. Oh shoot, I didn't turn my phone off. Um, it'll stop. But in the crowdfunding, what is such a great strategy is to transform a donor into a major donor or an investor, depending which way you're going and what your work is. But the other thing you said was about, expanding the size of your pool. So if your pool is this big and you have, I had a client one time making her first short film with me. She had 21 names in her phone. So she had a very small network, but as she was fundraising, that network is getting larger and larger, and then with each film you make, it gets larger and larger. And the beautiful thing about crowdfunding, which is certainly not the only way to raise money, but the beautiful thing about crowdfunding is that you get to both raise money and market at the same time. So you're growing your network. And then another thing that you said, Michael, that a lot of filmmakers have this block where they think, and I can't go back to them because they already gave. No, those are the people you go back to because they are the ones who want to support, and they saw that you finished the film, you did what you said you were going to do, and they're going to want to support the next step. So these, you just said so many important things right then. But I think that in James's question, what I hear and what I hear from a lot of people is the idea that somehow there are friends and family over here, and then there are investors over here, but actually they're connected.
Yeah.
And the investor is actually part of that pool, and you want to expand the pool to include more people and more potential investors. But it's great.
Yeah, and the other thing is that people who invest and are good at it, or who do it as a thing, they know other people who do that, and they talk to each other, right? So it's like, there was a point where, with a larger rom-com that I've been working on, one of our investors belonged to a pool of people who invested in indie financing that he wasn't yet prepared to go to them and be like, hey, like, help me raise $1 million for this movie that I'm an investor in. But if we had the attachments and we needed to get those dollars to start coming in, he would have felt comfortable going into this group, which until previously had invested in larger films with established filmmakers with name talent, but of which we would have been more comparable.
Exactly. All right, let's take one last question. Siva Kumar, good to see you.
Hi, Ben. Thank you. Actually, just want to ask one question. So you made 3 already films, right? So what is the gap for each film? I think of 3 to 4 years, the time taking because of the script process completion, or getting the director or the funding actually. So what's the reason for this gap?
Yeah, I think the primary reason for, well, look, like, even like a Hollywood movie is going to take at best like a year, maybe 6 months to finish. Like if they have, probably, no, I don't know. I don't really know entirely what I'm talking about, but they can do it fast because they have the money, right? Where delays come in on smaller productions is just where you have to spend time in a slower flow than you can when you have more money. So it's like, my first feature, the scripting went fairly quickly just because I had enough reps behind me that I could write more quickly. The fundraising, went at an okay pace because we had a crowdfunding campaign with a timeline attached to it. Did make the mistake of pre-producing at the same time, which I would not recommend doing for a feature, because it was just debilitating. And then post for that took a really long time because we ran out of money and had to find some. I was also editing the movie because I could, and it was saving money, but I was doing it outside of, like, I was doing it on nights, weekends, lunches around my day job. And then I got injured because I was overworking doing that. So that, that slowed things down. And then, we didn't have a lot of money. You can find, if you can, what's that triangle? Like, you can have it fast, you can have it good, or you can have it cheap, but you can only have 2 out of the 3. Like that's going to kind of rule what you do. but I'll say that like once we got up to the Sleepless, like it was enough money and a good enough, I think, script with a strong enough team behind it that like it went faster because we were just kind of calling in favors where people were like, yeah, normally we would charge twice this, but like half of it is enough for us to squeeze it in here and still get it to you like in time for your festival deadline. But like, you know, you just have to work with us in terms of like, you know, I would go to my day job and then I would go by the studio, the post studio on, you know, after for a couple of hours to review their work in between. And I think remote technology is making things go faster as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I think, and then also honestly, like I'm not going to make something unless I think it's a good idea. So like I'll write entire scripts, first drafts to maybe like third drafts, where ultimately I'm like, you know what, this isn't. There's a reason why. I'll just say there's a reason why I've produced the ones that actually go all the way through to production. And I think that it takes time to do that. I'm getting better at identifying that, I think, sooner, so that like, because I think part of the next level for me or for anyone as a filmmaker is like to have a couple of irons in the fire, because like once you do get into the system, whether it's the independent, unofficial independent system that's like struggling to fill what's been hollowed out in Hollywood over the past like decade, where like movies are either $100 million or 1 million and nothing in between. Whether it's that or getting into the system, like, you know, I think it's having an answer to like, what are you working on? That's more than just like one project, because you never know what's going to go when, or who's going to want to fund what when, or what actor's going to get interested in what when. So it's like, I think that's a part of it too.
Thanks, Shiva Kumar. Good to see you.
You.
All right, we are going to bring to a close. Thank you so much, Michael. What a fabulous interview. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And I just couldn't talk to filmmakers all day, so it's always fun for me. But and we are all waiting with bated breath to see the Yorkie Werewolf, and then in the meantime, there are lots of other films to see. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Rebecca, for being here as well. We haven't met, but I'm sure we will. And Melissa Houghton's here from Women in Film and Television. Kendall Bradwell is here from who is my brand new Filmmaker Success intern. So thank you for coming. Tom Disher, thank you for coming from San Francisco. And my clients, Kay and Chris and Lexi and who else? And thanks everybody for being here. I love to talk about filmmaking and the process of getting your careers going. And again, if you want to talk to me about getting your filmmaking career going, getting into the business of film, making money from your films, that's what I specialize in. So set a time to talk to me. And goodbye, everybody. Great to see you all.